Hey there, welcome to the Reinsurance Podcast, the place where we dive into all things reinsurance, the coolest part of insurance. We're your hosts, Jared and Ben, a couple of ex-practitioners who loved the industry so much we founded Supercede to tackle some of its biggest headaches. And we're here to share our insights and stories with expert guests as we uncover what's really going on in the industry.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Reinsurance Podcast, live from Monte Carlo. Well, probably not live, but at Monte Carlo, at least.
Very live while we do it, anyway.
Exactly. And as you've already heard the voice of, my special guest now is John Mason, the new CEO of PPL, so welcome.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Pleasure to have you on the show for abundance of reasons, partly because, one, you come from outside the industry, so you bring in tons of new perspectives on the space. Secondly, you're also looking at something quite specific within the London market, which many of our listeners will be familiar with, many very zoomed out views, so you'll be able to help us navigate that a bit. But why don't we start with yourself? How did you find yourself in the world of insurance?
In essence, that came through a headhunter, in that I was working at the London Stock Exchange Group, and listeners should be aware there's London Stock Exchange Group, which is a number of elements within the organisation itself, which includes the London Stock Exchange, but it has things like the London Clearing House, and it has the old Thomson Reuters Refinitiv data business. And I'd come into it through the data business. And I'd moved on from the London Stock Exchange, and the industry, or PPL, came looking for someone who had a data platform, digital transformation type background. I spent 6 months telling them I didn't have an insurance background. They said, that's fine, we're okay with that.
Might be a good thing.
We actually more want the digital transformation and the data background. So the more I spoke to them, the more excited I got about the opportunity. So started with the company in early April of this year.
Oh, amazing. And how's it been coming in? Because I understand quite a complicated beast, the London market.
It is a complicated beast in terms of understanding all the relationships, the specialty insurance market. PPL sits at that nexus, if you like, between the pre-bind and the post-bind. So in my old world, what I would have called pre-trade and post-trade, or pre-trade and transaction. And so the broker and the underwriter will engage in their relationship, and then as and when they're willing to commit to contract, as it were, PPL comes in as that electronic trading platform that sits between the broker and the underwriter and the carriers. So we provide that contractual binding, the legal element, if you like, to the negotiation. But understanding that and getting up to grips, up to speed with that has been quite a challenge, quite a curve for me to get up. Despite some of the nuances, let's say, of my old world, the capital markets, insurance has its own nuances as well, in terms of exactly how the trade is done, the relationships, and all of the detail, as is often the case.
Yeah. What have your first impressions been, I guess, coming from an industry that we often think of ourselves in insurance as about 5 years behind the banking world? Does that stack up, or...?
I think it's unfair.
Five is an underestimate.
Well, some people have used bigger numbers with me, but it's a different marketplace. I think the challenge that insurance has had is sometimes it looks to the equities market. It looks to something like the London Stock Exchange as an example, and then it will quite rightly say, "Oh, our industry is more complex than that." And if you think of that's an order book marketplace, if you like. If you look at some of the quote markets, fixed income and so on, they are more complicated. The OTC markets, the over-the-counter markets, are more akin, I think, in some respects, to the insurance market. They're more of a broker and two counterparties relationship rather than an exchange, if you like. So I think in some respects, insurance sometimes compares itself to the equities market, and it looks at the deregulation that took place there, 2007, 2008, with the original MiFID, and it says, we are 5, 10, 15, 20 years behind capital markets. And I just don't think it's that simple, to be honest. I think there are other examples of where there were more unlit markets in the capital market space, fixed income particularly, that started to get lit around about 2017, 2018 with the second MiFID directive. And I think those examples are more pertinent to insurance. But
so 7 or 8 years behind. It's better than 15 or 20.
I still don't think. I think there there seems to be a mistrust of digital transformation. I think a lot of people feel it would replace the human in the loop, rather than perhaps direct or augment or supplement the human in the loop. And I find myself talking to people about, my sons today use WhatsApp as far as relationship management is concerned. When I was growing up, relationship management technology was a telephone, and when my mother was growing up, relationship management was a pen friend. It was pen and paper. There's still relationship management, there's still people in the loop, but the underlying technology has completely transformed how you go about it. And I think it's looking at those areas within the insurance system where we can provide an augmentation, a supplement to the brokers, the underwriters, and how they go about their relationships, rather than people worrying that it will somehow diminish the relationship or remove it altogether.
Oh, absolutely. And the London market, as most listeners will be familiar, is especially, put a lot of import on those relationships between individuals and so on, long standing relationships, and a lot is done face to face and in person. And so, it'd be great to get your sort of views on this, but PPL obviously was brought in to try and help manage the transition, I guess, in some ways towards a digital way of doing face to face. It's two quite difficult things to reconcile, I guess.
They are, and back when I was growing up, as it were, you had trade support, and trade support were in the old open outcry markets. The deal was done, and then the ticket was thrown over the shoulder to someone in trade support, and they would type it up. I still think there's an element of that with PPL, and not just PPL, with all of the placing engines in that regard. In that, if it's a 7-step process to get something done, PPL is at step 5.
You put it in.
And 1 to 4 is very much the relationship management and the trading end of the spectrum. And then when it needs to actually turn into a transaction, as it were, and be booked, then someone turns to someone and says, right, that needs entering, and please get it entered. I think for us and for the market as a whole, how we move left of arc into that trading end of the spectrum, and how we start delivering data in a way that benefits brokers, underwriters, so they get real utility and real use out of data. That's when the market will genuinely become data-driven, as opposed to sort of this data-first type concept that we have at the moment, which again predominantly seems more around that transaction end, the CDR, the Blueprint 2, the operational efficiency end, rather than necessarily how is this helping our brokers and our underwriters trade. And I think if we can start providing that type of capability into the industry, then the industry will adopt that a little bit faster.
That makes sense. And I appreciate, so I'm going to ask you a question, but you've only had 5 months to unpack it all, but you mentioned Blueprint 2. I think a lot of our listeners have heard of Blueprint 2 with a number 1 podcast in Bermuda, for example. So some of this is quite, a distant concept. Could you help unpack, what Blueprint 2 is versus Future at Lloyd's versus PPL versus
I shall try within in terms of...
There's Velonetics, the other one, isn't it?
So Velonetics, and again, if you think of that sort of trade transaction, and again, pre-trade, post-trade, so we, PPL, sit at that, almost the nexus between what I would call trade and transaction. And the reason I'm continually differentiating between those two, if you think in the capital market space, think of a fixed income instrument. Trade data would be, I'm buying an Apple corporate bond, it's at 5.25% and it pays over 20 years. And I buy 5 million of them at $1. By the time that came to the transaction, that would just mean $5 million. And all of that rich trade information is unnecessary at that point, to be honest. You're just booking the transaction. And then, of course, that would go on and get settled and cleared and then settled. And in that sense, Velonetics and Blueprint 2 sit at that transaction end of the spectrum. It's very much the settling and then the ongoing claims against that, potential claims against that policy. Whereas PPL sits sort of 1 step ahead of that, where it's taking information between the broker and the underwriter, and then it's getting to the point of underwriters, and then it's getting to the point when they've all agreed and booked the trade at that point and said, yes, we're all now contractually bound that this is the way we want to go. And then the system would move it on through to Velonetics. So from our perspective, Blueprint 2 is about integration to the Velonetics gateway.
Okay.
It's about being able to pass that data on, using the core data record, using CDR, so that all of those common data fields that Velonetics are expecting is passed on by us.
So you're feeding them effectively with what they need?
In essence, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful, thank you. And which, again, just to continue the disambiguation, which bits are sort of market funded and which bits are from private companies? Or
so we're market funded.
Yeah.
Our ownership structure is Lloyd's and the 3 market associations. Even in our new structure, and that's been quite well reported, that we moved from almost a mutual ownership or limited by guarantee to now limited by shares. Our ownership structure is still very much Lloyd's, and then the LMA, the IUA, and LIBA. So nothing changes in that regard. We're still a market-owned utility, being an infrastructure component being provided for the market, by the market, for want of a better phrase. I know that's something that's been used in the past about PPL, but nothing changes as we go forward.
Yeah, makes sense. And the only other final disambiguation, you had PPL and then something called Next Gen PPL as well?
So, yes.
What was the change? Or
potted history to PPL, really, in that it... some people who got spun out of Lloyd's with some contractors, their job was to set up an electronic trading environment. That was done using a third-party application. At some point, they felt the need, this predates me, to move away from that application for their respective reasons, and Next Gen was the reauthoring of that application. So that was a brand new application that was authored. Still doing, in terms of process and procedure, the same job, still binding the contract, but the organisation felt it wanted to, as the name somewhat suggests, move to the next level of technical authorship, embrace some of the new capabilities and technologies that were available, and so it built a new platform.
That's really helpful, thank you. So it means that now I can ask you slightly more forward-looking questions.
No, don't
and everybody's got the same,
I suspect there are people listening saying, "Oh, he's got that wrong."
I'm sure you covered it perfectly, especially after only 5 months of making sense.
Well, hopefully.
So you've inherited the Next Gen platform with some new bits to come quite soon, you said, as well, which will be exciting. The one thing that we hear about a lot is like the switch-on date almost, or the switch-over when lots of people will start using it, who maybe weren't before, a cut-off of some kind?
Well, everyone's on Next Gen now.
Okay, so that's already
that's all done. So
what's the thing I'm referring to?
I would imagine that could be the integration to Blueprint 2.
Okay.
So Blueprint 2, there was a recent announcement that got slightly pushed right, and obviously they've had some organisational changes with Bob coming in and taking over as the CEO of Velonetics. So we're waiting for that, in essence, phase 2 of Blueprint 2 to come about, and then we will integrate to the gateway at that point. But as far as we're concerned, I mean, everyone is now on Next Gen and has been for a while. That represents about 85% of the London market is processed through Next Gen. It's roughly a couple of million transactions a year. It's 25,000 users. It's getting on for 500 companies between brokers and underwriters. So
no small task then.
No, and I mean there's a lot of criticism of Next Gen in the market, but in terms of this is not my baby. I've got no axe to grind, as it were. Then to transition that level of market infrastructure over the time frame that they did, yes, there were hiccups. I think that's well known, but those are being addressed. But to move that level of market to that degree, I think the team should be proud of what they did, quite frankly. And it's given us a great platform to move forward.
What were the main criticisms, and are they being addressed with some of the new things you talked about?
Principal ones were people felt the system was kludgy, clunky to work with. that some of the screens, the way in which you navigated across the screens weren't as slick as it could have been.
The user experience.
User experience wasn't great. So those are things that we've addressed. We engaged a third party. We went out to the market. We got a lot of feedback. We did a lot of presentations, and then in the next release, which comes out, what are we now, 9th, 10th of September? So it comes out due out later this month. That releases our Express contract, which is the first of those enhanced user experiences. And again, from the market feedback we've had, that's been very well received. So very keen to see how that goes in reality. And then there'll be further releases. The company was very much wanting to get releases out into the marketplace. We're slightly slowing down. Emphasis is on quality, not quantity of capability. So there'll be another release before Christmas, before the year end. But as I say, there's other work that we're doing, which, as I say, is pretty exciting, which I think has a more strategic and long-term nature to it.
Exciting. And just to confirm, so are you, as PPL, more tech commissioners or actually building the tech yourselves as a company?
So slightly more of a commissioner at the moment. Again, I think it's been well reported, so we've outsourced the build, but outsourcing build is not unusual to a lot of organisations. Over time, we'll start to look to see whether we bring some of that in-house and what we do bring in-house. But a lot of the design, the business analysis, all of that is in-house already. And then we outsource the build and elements of the support. And they'd say that's not unusual for technology companies in this day and age. Quite a lot of them either have captives or offshore capability, and we're no different in that regard. But the core principles, the IP, for example, is all PPL.
Brilliant. So what brings PPL and yourself to Monte Carlo? What are your main aims this week here at the conference?
Really, I'm new to the industry, so I wanted to, I'd heard about the Rendezvous event, so wanted to experience it for myself. PPL's not necessarily been at the Rendezvous event in the past, so again, really just determine whether this was something we should have a presence at. But it's given me the opportunity to meet with some clients, meet with some customers, and generally live up to the name of Rendezvous, I guess, in terms of meeting with people. And there are further meetings to come, attend some events and listening to some roundtables. So really it's just a fact-finding and experiencing the event at this point.
Brilliant. And are any of the big key themes affecting your build plans over the next few years? Are you looking at like, oh, that's going to be a thing, we're going to have to do X, or is it quite...
Well, I think how people are looking at data and how people are looking at potentially attracting capital and capacity into the market, those are all areas that we're looking at and thinking about. Particularly as we push into that trading end of the spectrum and understand what data is there, and whether we can look at that more strategically, if you like.
So PPL's role could expand a bit potentially within...
I would hope so. I would hope so.
I guess that would come at more costs, presumably, but that people are willing, hopefully, to support it? Or?
I think... I hope there would be a willingness to support it. I think it would be, certainly the conversations we've had with some organisations to date, is it would be mutually beneficial. So those are areas that we're all looking to look into in more detail. But as I say, I think understanding the full spectrum of data, the industry is still quite process driven, I would say, with what's the data I need to fulfill a certain process. Certainly my old world, my old job, and then what I'd like to bring to this one is very much, when we talk about data first, is how do we bring the process to a common data core, and how do we then apply those processes to the data. But the data is consistency. It's the primary factor, if you like, and the processes come to it, rather than the process is the primary factor, and it consumes whatever data it needs, and all you end up then is lots of siloed data sitting across multiple processes. So if we can bring that, then I think we can perhaps do more with the data, provide more insight, more value to our clients, and that's something that I think we'll look into in more detail over the next few months and years.
A real pleasure having you on the show. Thanks
for having me.
Helping probably a lot of people understand a lot of things they were very hazy on before. So
if I've done that, then sure. I'll be amazed actually. But no, I'm glad I could help.
Well, thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks very much, Ben.
Thanks for tuning in to the Reinsurance podcast. If you enjoyed our show, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review to let us know how we're doing, preferably 5 stars. For more insights and updates, follow us on LinkedIn and visit our website at supercede.com/podcasts. You'll find the links in the show notes.